You call 911, you don't know if someone's going to show up or not. It's like, how scary is that? You call 911, you don't know if someone's going to show up or not. And it said at the end, Karen Weaver is safer, are you safer? That's pretty dark. It was paid for by a group, Opportunity for Michigan. I have no idea. I spent hours trying to figure out who's behind them. I have no idea who gave them money or where they are. They were spending in the Flint mayoral election. Their base, their address, a UPS store in Lansing.
Yeah.
You can't find out who's behind it. But the ad, runs days before the election, and it just rips Karen Weaver up and down, but they don't have to disclose their donors. I'll tell just a little bit of background on this that will tell you a lot of information about how important it is to the people who write these checks to these dark money groups that you not know that they're doing it or who they are. In 2013, the league people will remember this in the room probably. In 2013, our Secretary of State, Ruth Johnson, a Republican, she came out and said on the morning of November 14th, I've got it here, the press release, November 14th, I was a traditional reporter covering the legislature then. I remember this morning in detail. Ruth Johnson puts out a press release and then does I think it was a teleconference. She said, I'm going to put new rules in place, administrative rules. She was going to pursue an administrative rule that said if you run a TV ad 60 days before the election that talks about a candidate, you now have to disclose your donors. So you see how she gets at the donors? If you mention Karen Weaver 60 days before the election in your paid TV ad, you now fall under our campaign finance disclosure rules. She put that out the morning of November 14th, 2013. They're called, for background, those ads are called issue ads. You hear the term issue ad thrown around. Those type of ads are called issue ads because they're supposedly not talking about candidates, they're talking about issues. So what else happened on November 14, 2013? There was a bill in a Senate committee that morning that said we're going to double our campaign contribution limits. So instead of being able to give someone running for the State House $500, you're now going to be able to give them $1,000. Instead of giving someone running for governor $3,400, you can now give them $6,800. So what happened this morning is that bill's in committee, the senators decide to change the bill. They hear what Ruth is doing. They respond by saying, we're going to put language in this bill that says you only have to disclose your donors if you expressly tell people how to vote. So if you know anything about the legislative process, a rule's down here, a law trumps a rule. So they changed this bill in response to what Ruth is doing to block her. That bill passed out of committee that morning, November 14th. It passed out of the Senate that day, November 14th. In the minimum time possible, 5 days later, under our rules, it went to the House. The House voted on it, approved it, sent it to the governor, who in December signed it and blocked the disclosure of issue ad donors, despite the fact that as a candidate, Governor Snyder said these type of ads should be disclosed. So he changes the position, signed the bill, and it says in our law now, you only have to disclose your donors if you do express advocacy. Tell people vote for or vote against. That's in our state law now, after Ruth pursued the rule. So what happens? Dark money happens at all levels of government. Some people think, well, this is just president or Congress. There are dark money mailers happening in precinct delegate races, township races, county races, city races, state races. This happens at all levels. There are different mailers, videos, TV ads, websites put up by groups that don't have to disclose where their money came from because they don't say vote for or vote against. It even happens at the state Supreme Court, which is the highest court in our state. If you appeal your court case, if you have a lawsuit going on, if you appeal it up, it's going to go to the state Supreme Court. They're going to decide it. 7 people sit on that court. They're elected. They serve 8-year terms. So every 8 years, they've got to run again. So about every election, we have 2 or 3 of them up for election because people move on and off the court a lot. So we have to have elections to fill their seats. What happens in our Supreme Court races in Michigan is pretty unique, is that usually about 50% of the money in these races comes from undisclosed sources. We don't know where the money came from. You can look this up, 2010, 2012, and 2014, Michigan had the most expensive and least transparent Supreme Court races in the nation for 3 cycles in a row. We did not have that in 2016 because the Democrats didn't contest the Supreme Court races. They didn't put money in there, so it wasn't a competitive election. The Republicans were going to win regardless. Democrats basically said you can keep the 2 seats you have that are up. So, and you can see this chart if I had it up. In 2012, the Supreme Court race, there were 3 seats up. The races cost $18 million. 75% of this money, 75% came from groups that didn't disclose where they got their money. So this is usually, maybe it's the Michigan Republican Party. It just says on the ad paid for by the Michigan Republican Party. You don't know where the money came from because it came from an account that they don't have to disclose. It came from the Michigan Democratic Party. Maybe it came from the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. Maybe it came from the Realtors Association. But at the end of the day, you don't know where they got their money from. And why does that? Why do you think it's so important to some donors to not disclose that they're getting involved in a Supreme Court race? Anyone?
Bias.
Bias. You know, there are court precedents that say, you know, if you're giving a whole bunch of money to a candidate who's a judge, that the other side of your case can say, hey, maybe this judge shouldn't be ruling on this case. There's precedent that allows for the recusal or disqualification of a judge who's taken a whole bunch of money from someone who's involved in a court case before them. One way you get around that is nobody knows you gave the campaign that's supporting the judge money. You know, no one can know who's funding these efforts to support these judges because the donors are hidden. You understand why this is so prevalent in the legal community? It's harder to track the bias. We have in this country, you know, the judicial branch is thought of as highly independent, right? So we can't get access to the information as to who's paying to support the judge and do they have cases that they're interested in that are before these judges. Right. You can't track that. I'll wrap up here and take questions with just a couple more slides. If you've heard this probably, in 2015, Michigan was rated 50th out of all 50 states for transparency and accountability. Look it up, Center for Public Integrity. We got an F, a lot of states got Fs, but we were ranked 50th out of 50 states. So if you think maybe Michigan's different from all the other states, and yeah, we are a little bit different. We're 50th out of 50. A lot of other states are moving, and a lot of other states are starting to see some of the stuff we've seen. Why are we 50th out of 50th? Well, all the other stuff I've described, in addition to that, the Center for Public Integrity looked at all these measurements. Does your law say this, or does your law say this? And that's how they graded all the states. It's a really objective way to look at this. We're one of 2 states that don't require state office holders to file personal financial disclosures. So in 48 states, if you're serving in the legislature, you have to file a public document that says, here are the places where I get outside income from. Or here are the major investments that I have. I'm heavily invested in consumers' energy. So maybe the public should know that if I'm voting on a bill that's going to help consumers' energy. That's kind of the approach here. We're one of 2 states where your office holders don't have to file financial disclosures. Another reason we're 50th out of 50th is we're one of 2 states, only 2 states in the nation, that exempt the legislature and the gubernatorial branch, the governor's office, from FOIA. So in 48 states, you can file a document and say, hey, that's a public record, the Freedom of Information Act. I want to see that public record, documents that are held by those organizations, the legislature. In Michigan, you cannot get a document that's within the legislature that's just a lawmaker's email to a lobbyist. You can't get that because they're exempt from FOIA.
What's the other state?
I don't know on the FOIA. I forget on FOIA. On the financial disclosure, it's us and Idaho. And Idaho's looking to change theirs right now, so we might be 50th out of 50th soon. I don't know on the FOIA. I'm not an expert on FOIA as I am on the other things. But the financial disclosure thing, I'll give you a quick example of why that matters. There was a state legislature in 2016, he's termed out now, who voted and took part in the discussion on this bill. Do you remember when the legislature decided what the rules should be for Uber? They were setting a legislative, here are the rules for Uber and Lyft. These are these ride-sharing services. If I need to ride home, I don't want to drive back to Lansing in the snow, someone come pick me up. Go on my phone and get Uber to come pick me up. The state legislature was going to set rules for what Uber can and can't do in the state. A lawmaker in this debate put up an amendment that said airports cannot ban Uber and Lyft from their property. Why does that matter? Well, think about all the pickups Uber and Lyft will do at airports. Airports have a lot of long-standing relationships with cab companies. So you could see the incentive. Some airports might say, well, we like these cab companies. We've worked with them for a long time. Uber and Lyft are not allowed to do business here. His amendment said you can't ban Uber and Lyft from your property if you're an airport. All right? Why does it matter? That guy happened to be driving for Uber on the side. He was an Uber driver. The only way that we came to find that out is that he picked up, he was a Republican, the only way we come to find that out is he picked up a Democratic staffer in his Uber. And the Democratic staffer said, Representative Somerville? You're driving for Uber? And then only later did people make the connection that, hey, he was driving for Uber, but he was also like heavily instrumental on this bill that helped Uber. His amendment didn't make the final law. It got taken out in the Senate. It was in the bill for a little bit, though. So holes in, just a couple more things, holes in Michigan's lobbying laws. So if you lobby a lawmaker and you buy them a meal, in Michigan, you only have to disclose that you bought that individual lawmaker a meal if you spend more than $60 on them in a month. Yeah, $60 in a month. And this, I have this on here. I love this slide. Filet mignon at the most expensive restaurant in downtown Lansing is $39. So someone could buy your lawmaker filet mignon and a beer once a month for the year and not disclose that they ever met with that lawmaker. They would disclose that they spent the money, but it wouldn't say, I spent the money on this lawmaker, which is the information that we need to have a full understanding of what's going on. One more that's just really funny, and I have a picture of my kid here. I'm one of those parents. You can't see it. I'm very disappointed by that. But it says in state law, gifts from lobbyists to lawmakers are banned. And you're like, oh, that makes sense. We shouldn't have lobbyists buying gifts for lawmakers. But then if you read down, it says gifts are something that costs more than $60 in a month. So they can buy gifts for lawmakers as long as it's less than $60. So I have a picture of my kid holding a gift that he got. And I always use this. What if your grandson or child said, Dad, you got me this gift. It was less than $60. It doesn't qualify as a gift. Right? I really just do it to use the picture of my kid. But that's in the law. And my closing slide, and then I'll take questions, is that that person I talked about in the beginning, Steve Linder, who was a consultant, who wouldn't say who funded him to be there. One of the things that's interesting is he was involved in a lawsuit with one of his former lobbying firms that he works for, and there were some emails released that the firm that he worked for was mad at him. They released some of his emails in the court case. And in the email, there was an email from Steve to some of his employees. And he said, the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, so this is the department that sets rules for businesses, LARA sent out an advisory bulletin on license stacking. So in the medical marijuana debate, this is inside baseball, but I hope you understand it. There's a debate over if you grow marijuana, can you also process marijuana? Can you also transport it? Can you also sell it from your same, through the same license? Or should we have separate licenses for each part of the business? The State Department said people can share a license, basically. You can stack your licenses. You could have like 10 licenses to grow marijuana in one property, stack them in that same property. So he got this news that you can stack your licenses. And he said, they sent out their advisory bulletin, quote, it's reflective of the conversation and requests we made of LARA yesterday. So his lobbying group had made a request of LARA, according to this email. What they put out, it was reflective. He lists how it was reflective. I won't bore you with that, 5 ways. At the end, he wrote, folks, we are having an impact on the process. So this is a lobbyist telling you, I'm having an impact on what's going on. So it's not like all this happens in a vacuum. All this money is spent in a vacuum. It's just spent to be spent. This is impacting what happens with public policy. That's what the last thing I want to get through. This is just not numbers and laws that are going to bore you. It does impact what happens in your life and what the laws are of the state. I'll just close and I'll take your questions or your criticisms. MCFN.org is our website. Check it out. We're on Facebook. We are a nonprofit. if you're like, man, I really like what this guy's talking about, you can donate to us on our website. There's a whole bunch of information on there. This is the work that we do, and I appreciate, this is awesome to get to talk to you guys. I'm so sorry about the PowerPoint. Thank you. That's all I got. So if you have questions, fire away.
I'm going to walk around with the microphone. Sorry, here.
Hi, Greg.
Hey.
You talked about the 3 buckets,
Yeah.
and could you give us an idea on the percentage that a candidate, an average candidate, might benefit from each of the buckets? Just on average, do you have any stats on that?
I don't have a stat on that because it depends heavily on the race. You know, if you're a candidate who's running in a seat that's safe, and you don't have to worry about, when I say safe, you know, it's maybe a district that's 80% Republican voters. You don't have to worry about someone challenging you. You're going to raise most of your money to your candidate committee. You know, dark money groups aren't going to get involved in your election. Super PACs aren't going to get involved because they're going to follow where the close races are. That's what drives up the cost of the close races. So, I mean, in like the gubernatorial elections that I was talking about, in that gubernatorial race, I would say 33% of the money in 2014 came from the candidates. Like 50% came from dark money groups that didn't have to disclose their donors. And then the other maybe 20% came from super PACs. But the super PACs are playing a larger role every election. In the presidential race, super PACs like dominate the spending.
Thank you.
So, yeah, for sure. Here, I can give you mine.
So say you're a candidate, you want to run in a contested district. Do you solicit the super PACs and the dark money? Did they solicit you? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we just had if you followed what happens in the legislature in 2017, they just passed a law on how regulations for super PACs. And it says in this law, you can look this up, there's a lot of stories written about it. I'm quoted in a lot of the stories, giving my thoughts on it. But it says in this law, a candidate can solicit contributions to a super PAC, and the super PAC's still independent of the candidate. So a candidate for governor could go up to someone under this law and say, hey, will you give $6,800 to my candidate committee for governor? All right, here's the check. You know, maybe an hour goes by, call them back. Hey, would you give $1 million to this super PAC that's going to support me? That's legal. They can solicit the contributions. You know, there's a lot we don't know about how some of these groups work, right? So we don't know how the solicitation works. One thing that's interesting is there's a court case in Wisconsin that a whole bunch of documents got leaked of this court case. It involved the courts in Wisconsin. And there were a whole bunch of dark money groups who were trying to elect a certain kind of judge to the Wisconsin bench. And in one of these emails and documents that got leaked, there was a check written from a donor to one of those dark money groups. And I'm not kidding you, I usually have this in my presentation, and it's awesome, it's funny. In the memo of the check, the donor wrote, because Scott Walker asked. Who's the governor of Wisconsin, had asked the donor to give $10,000 to this group. The donor wrote on it, who uses the memo line that often, but he wrote on there, because Scott Walker asked. You can look that up. Just type in, the headline of the story about it was called Because Scott Walker Asked. Go look it up. It was about all of these groups, so that's where you can get, you know, that's a little bit of the information we know. We don't know all of it, where the money comes from, but some of the groups, like the business groups or a union group, you know, they're getting money from their members, from the union members, from the business members. They're raising the money, and they tell them, you know, we're going to spend this in the races we choose. So those groups are deciding which races to spend the money in. Yes, back there.
What do you suggest to reverse this?
You know, that's interesting. That's not really my realm, right? The league has a lot of positions on those things. You know, we track the money, we follow these things, we try to give the public data on what's going on and be like, you know, hey, there's a lot more money happening here from the data, this is what we're seeing, this is who's giving money to people. There are a lot of different ideas out there about how to fix these things. Some of them are extremely, ideas that seem really bold, like we're going to change the U.S. Constitution. That's an idea that's out there. Amend the Constitution to take on these super PACs. There are other ideas that are as simple as, you know, on some of these things, like lobbyists shouldn't be able to buy food for people anonymously. Let's just say any meal a lobbyist buys has to be disclosed. I mean, there are little things like that. We're big on, we are a transparency organization. So, I mean, I personally feel, a lot of this would be solved if we just knew where the money was coming from. And we just said to the public, you get to know where the money's coming from. And the public can decide then, what they do with that information. Maybe they'll act on it. Maybe they won't act on it. Maybe they won't care. But a lot of these people, I believe, would not give money to these groups if they knew the public was going to find out about it. So as soon as you brought transparency into this, some of this money is going to go away because the secrecy is more important to some people than actually giving the contribution. It's just my take.
So the league is supportive of increased disclosure laws at the federal and the state level, and also has offered some thoughts on public financing of campaigns. So those are kind of some of the main league principles. There's a hand somewhere in here.
Is Open Secrets a good place to go to see where
Turn the
people are getting
mic
their
on.
money?
I can repeat her question. And she said, is Open Secrets a good place to go? Yeah, it's an excellent, Open Secrets, I think it's .org.
.org.
So, yeah, OpenSecrets.org is a nonprofit that does a lot of the stuff we do, but they do it at the national level. So if you want to look up who's giving money to your federal lawmaker or read stories about money in politics at the national level, they do a lot of that work. And they do a good job. They're from the Center for Responsive Politics is who runs that organization.
Well, with disclosures by corporations, what about corporations, foundations?
So if a corporation has a foundation that gives out money, I think I understand. Corporations that get involved in politics, they usually give the money directly from their corporate accounts. So if Consumers Energy or DTE, one of the utilities, they have foundations. A lot of time they're giving that money to charitable, that money is usually charity money that they have to give to charitable organizations, so it can't be involved in politics. So if they were going to give to a dark money group from their corporate account, it would just come from a corporate fund that they have.
It wouldn't come from the foundation.
No, so the foundation is probably, 501c. It's a different type of nonprofit that the IRS would say, you can't get involved in politics in any way through this type of nonprofit. So there has to be kind of a barrier there. So that's, there are theories out there that different businesses with foundations that are involved in public policy will do things like, we're going to give backpacks to a school in this lawmaker's district because we want this lawmaker to look good. So that would be an example of charity money, but you just don't know where you draw the line as to what's influencing them and what's not influencing them.
This way. This helps with the
How
the
can
mic.
this scenario
Just wait,
change?
just a second, Barb.
Which scenario?
The whole bag.
I kind of said that. You want to repeat it? Or?
How can this whole bag be
Yeah.
changed?
Well, I mean, they're different. People have different solutions on that, right? Like the league has a whole platform of where they stand on these things. The league, money in politics, is a very important subject to the League of Women Voters. Other groups, like I said, want to have a constitutional amendment. Like their idea is to say, one of the group's idea is to have a constitutional amendment that says corporations are not entitled to the same free speech rights that individuals are entitled to.
Is anyone working on that?
Yeah, there are groups out there that you can look up if you just Google those type of words. There are a lot of groups out
The league
there.
is working on
Yeah.
these issues. Maybe
Yeah,
really.
the league is heavy on these. I don't think the league is right now in support of a constitutional amendment. They have their campaign. Public financing is an idea a lot of people are pushing. There was a group called have you heard of Represent Us? It's a national group that works on these things. They looked at a few years ago doing a local ballot proposal in Lansing that would give everyone, this is their idea, give everyone, I think it was a $50, you'd have a tax credit of $50 for every $50 you gave to up to $50. If you gave $50 to a candidate, you get a $50 tax credit. So the idea there, it's complicated, is that you flood all of this big money out by giving everyone the ability to give a small donation. So basically, I could go give $50 to a candidate I like and then get a credit on my taxes of $50. So that's one group's idea of how you could do something. Really, there are so many different areas that need work done in this realm, like lobbying, financial disclosure, FOIA, campaign finance. There are a whole bunch of areas. So it would take, fixing all of them or improving all of them would be, it would be a variety of solutions. Is that good?
It seems like there was a mad scramble by our legislature to, after the data was released about where our state stood in terms of transparency. And the mad scramble was to become less transparent. And one bill that I think passed recently, and maybe you can speak to it, adds even more money to individuals' campaigns. Haven't they raised the limit?
I think you're probably talking about the bill the Super PAC bill that I was talking about, which is Senate Bill 661, that sets rules for super PACs and says candidates can solicit money to super PACs. And the other side of that, they say this is free speech. A candidate should be able to go ask for a contribution to a super PAC. The other side, and the argument that I have made, is that if a candidate can solicit money to a super PAC that supports them, our contribution limits are meaningless. Because even though you're limited on what you can raise for your own committee, you can then go ask anyone to give as much money as you want them to give to this other entity that's going to be run by people. Lansing's not that big of a town. So, the same politician could have two friendly consultants and say, consultant, you work on my candidate committee. Hey, other consultant, you work on my super PAC. And it's basically, the operations are so close together, you can't tell them apart. We've seen this on the presidential level. Hillary Clinton had her candidate committee and she had a super PAC, Priorities USA. Most of the ads you saw was Priorities USA. They were both run by Clinton supporters that were close to her. At the federal level, however, Hillary Clinton could only ask someone to give $2,700 to her super PAC. In Michigan now, Gretchen Whitmer, Bill Schuette, anyone running for governor can now ask someone to give $2 million to their super PAC. So that's probably what you're getting at.
So pressure on our legislators.
The legislators make a lot of these decisions. And one thing that I will say on that subject is when this bill 661 was going through, one of the reporters for the Free Press came up to me and she said, why doesn't anyone care about this? Because if you follow journalism today, the for-profit news companies often are looking at who is clicking on our stories. So they're monitoring how many visits these stories are getting, who's looking at these stories, and the reporter basically said, not many people are clicking on this story about this super PAC bill. Because people just, people don't often understand or don't take an interest in these complex things that actually have a big effect on how their government works. One quick tidbit on that. Do you guys know who Jack Lessenberry is?
Yeah.
I was speaking at he teaches at Wayne State journalism. And I gave a similar presentation to the journalism students saying, you guys should work in this area when you get out of school. And one of the students was saying, this is terrible. This is horrible. How does this happen in our state? And Jack, I'll never forget this. He looked at the student in the eyes and said, who's your state representative? And the student was like, oh, I know. It's Debbie Stabenow. And that's your U.S. senator, right? So that's kind of the thing here is the education about how these things work and getting people to take, that's what we do. We go out and talk to people about these subjects so they're aware of what's going on.
every day for a month. But the legislatures are not going to vote down free lunch every day of the month.
That's a hurdle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? I think that's a good thing to say. Is the legislature going to penalize themselves with this lobbying stuff?
Yeah.
Maybe they're not. The same thing is, people said they're never going to change this gerrymandering thing, right? And now that you have this ballot proposal crop up and say, hey, we're just going to go around you. So, that's happened in other states. In South Dakota in 2016, there was a ballot proposal on lobbying and campaign finance reform. It passed. There was also a ballot proposal on gerrymandering. The gerrymandering one failed. The one on campaign finance reform and lobbying passed because this issue is an interesting issue in terms of it's one of those things where people on any political spectrum tend to agree on these things, even though their lawmakers might. So, there are ways, even if the legislature says, hey, we're not going to go along with you, there are other ways to solve this problem, and there are lawmakers who do agree, like, we shouldn't be getting all these free lunches. If you look, every time they put out the reports on lobbyist spending, we rank lawmakers on how many free lunches they're getting. There are lawmakers getting thousands of dollars in free lunches, but there's a lot more lawmakers getting like $100 in free lunches. So it's not like every lawmaker is taking advantage of this to the full extent that they could. I mean, there's definitely some, more than